There's a version of you that has to die, not metaphorically, not symbolically, actually die. And until you're willing to kill it, until you're willing to watch it dissolve and not try to resurrect it, you will stay exactly where you are, stuck, frustrated, knowing you're capable of more but unable to access it. Because the person you are right now, the one with all the patterns and habits and beliefs and fears, that person was designed for the life you have, not the life you want. And you cannot reach a new destination while dragging your old self along for the ride. Let me be clear about what I mean. I'm not talking about self-improvement. I'm not talking about becoming a better version of yourself. I'm talking about something more fundamental, more terrifying. I'm talking about identity death, the complete dissolution of who you believe you are so that something new can emerge. And this isn't spiritual bypassing or New Age philosophy. This is neuroscience. This is psychology. This is the actual mechanism of transformation that nobody wants to talk about because it sounds too hard, too dramatic, too final. Your brain has constructed a model of who you are. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network. It's the region of your brain that maintains your sense of self, your ego, your identity. And that identity isn't just a vague concept. It's a complex web of neural connections that determine how you think, what you believe is possible, how you react to situations, what choices you make. It's the operating system running in the background of your consciousness. And just like an operating system, it was programmed based on your past experiences, your environment, your survival needs at the time it was formed. Here's the problem. That operating system was built for a different life. It was built when you were younger, less experienced, facing different challenges in different circumstances. And it's optimized for that past reality. Every pattern, every habit, every automatic response, it's all calibrated to keep you alive and functional in a world that no longer exists. But your brain doesn't know that. As far as your default mode network is concerned, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, keeping you consistent, keeping you predictable, keeping you safe. And safe means staying exactly who you've always been. This is why all your attempts to change have failed. Not because you lack willpower, not because you're not trying hard enough, but because you're trying to run new software on old hardware. You're trying to change your behaviors, your habits, your outcomes, while keeping your identity intact. And that doesn't work, because your identity will always pull you back. It will sabotage your new behaviors. It will find ways to prove that the old you is the real you, because that's literally its job, to maintain continuity of self, to ensure that you tomorrow are recognizably the same person as you today. And that function, that protective mechanism, is the very thing preventing your transformation. Think about the last time you tried to change something significant. Maybe you wanted to start a business, or end a relationship, or move to a new city, or pursue a different career. You probably felt excited at first, motivated, clear about what needed to happen. But then, as you got closer to actually doing it, something shifted. Doubt crept in. Fear appeared. Suddenly, all the reasons why it might not work became crystal clear, and that voice in your head, the one that sounds like you, started talking you out of it, telling you to be realistic, to be careful, to not do anything rash, to think about it more. And you listened, because that voice is you. Or at least, it's the version of you that your brain has spent years constructing and protecting. But here's what you need to understand. That voice isn't trying to help you grow. It's trying to keep you the same. Because to your default mode network, sameness equals survival, change equals threat. It doesn't matter if the change would make you happier, more fulfilled, more successful. What matters is that it would make you different, and different means unknown. And unknown triggers every alarm system in your brain. Let me tell you about Rebecca, 36 years old, corporate lawyer at a prestigious firm, 6-figure salary, respected, accomplished, miserable. She'd been miserable for 7 years. She knew exactly when it started, the moment she made partner, the thing she'd worked toward for a decade, and the moment she achieved it, she felt nothing, no joy, no satisfaction. Just this crushing realization that she'd spent 10 years climbing a ladder leaning against the wrong wall. She didn't want to be a lawyer. She'd never wanted to be a lawyer. She'd wanted to make her parents proud. She'd wanted to prove she was smart. She'd wanted security and status and all the things that being a successful lawyer provided. But she didn't want the actual life that came with it. So she decided to leave, to start over, to pursue what she actually wanted, which was to work with her hands, to create physical things, to run a small woodworking business. She'd always loved working with wood. It was the one thing that made her feel present and alive. And she had the money saved. She had the skills. She had a plan. Everything was in place, except she couldn't do it. Every time she got close to handing in her resignation, every time she sat down to draft the letter, her body would physically revolt. Her heart would race. Her hands would shake. She'd feel nauseous, and that voice would get louder. "What are you doing? You worked so hard for this. People would kill for your job. You're throwing away everything you've built. What if the business fails? What if you run out of money? What if everyone thinks you're crazy? What if you are crazy?" And Rebecca would back down. She'd close the document. She'd take a deep breath. She'd tell herself she was being impulsive, that she needed to think about it more, that maybe next year would be better, and she'd go back to her miserable, prestigious job and die a little more inside every day. And this cycle repeated for 3 years. 3 years of knowing what she wanted, knowing what she needed to do, and being completely unable to do it. Not because the obstacle was external, but because the obstacle was her own identity. Rebecca identified as a lawyer. More specifically, she identified as a successful lawyer. That's who she'd told everyone she was. That's who she'd spent 15 years becoming. Her entire sense of self was wrapped up in that identity. Her ego, her default mode network, it was calibrated to maintain that sense of self. And leaving law, starting a woodworking business, that didn't just mean changing careers. It meant killing the lawyer. It meant becoming unrecognizable to herself and everyone who knew her. It meant admitting that the person she'd spent 15 years constructing was a mistake. And that felt like death, because in a very real neurological sense, this is what people don't tell you about transformation. It requires the death of your current identity, and death is terrifying, even when the thing dying is making you miserable, even when you consciously want it gone, because it's familiar, it's known, it's you, or at least it's who you think you are. And letting that go means floating in the unknown, means not knowing who you'll be on the other side, means risking that you might become someone you don't recognize, someone you don't like, someone who doesn't belong anywhere because you're no longer who you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. The neuroscience here is fascinating. Studies on ego dissolution, that experience of your sense of self temporarily dissolving, show dramatic changes in brain activity. Specifically, the default mode network, that region responsible for your sense of identity, shows significantly decreased activity. And in that decreased activity, in that temporary death of ego, people report profound experiences. They feel connected to everything. They see their problems from a completely different perspective. They experience a kind of freedom that's impossible when their identity is active and defending itself. But here's the crucial part. That ego dissolution, that identity death, it's not just about the mystical experience. It's about what becomes possible when your identity stops running the show. When you're not constantly defending who you think you are, you can finally see who you could become. When you're not invested in maintaining your current self-image, you can take actions that would have been impossible before, because those actions no longer threaten your sense of self. They're just actions, neutral, available, possible. Rebecca finally did it. Not because she found more courage, not because circumstances changed, but because she had what can only be described as an identity crisis. She was in a deposition, sitting across from opposing counsel, going through the motions of a case she didn't care about, arguing points that didn't matter, and she had this moment of absolute clarity. She looked at herself from outside herself and thought, this person is already dead. She's been dead for years. She's just going through the motions. She's a ghost pretending to be alive. And in that moment, Rebecca stopped trying to preserve the lawyer. She stopped trying to make that identity work. She just let it die. Right there in that conference room, she felt something release. A tightness she'd been carrying for so long, she'd forgotten it was there. And that night, she wrote her resignation letter. Not carefully, not strategically, just honestly. I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. And the response from everyone in her life was exactly what she'd feared. Her parents were devastated. Her colleagues were confused. Her friends thought she was having a breakdown. And maybe she was. But it wasn't the bad kind. It was the necessary kind. The kind where your old self breaks down so your new self can break through. And for the first 6 months after leaving, Rebecca felt completely unmoored. She didn't know who she was anymore. She'd wake up, and the automatic thought I'm a lawyer wouldn't be true anymore, and nothing had replaced it yet. She was just Rebecca, without qualifiers, without impressive titles, without the identity that had defined her for 15 years. And that was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. People ask her now if she regrets it, if she misses the money or the status or the certainty of her old life. And she says something interesting. She says the person who could regret it doesn't exist anymore. That person died. She's not a lawyer who left law. She's someone else entirely, someone who happens to remember being a lawyer the way you might remember a dream. It happened, it was real, but it wasn't really her. It was just a role she played for a while, and now she's playing a different role. Or maybe not playing at all. Maybe just being. This is what identity death actually means. It's not that you become no one. It's that you stop being someone specific. You stop defending a particular version of yourself. You stop needing to be consistent with who you were yesterday. You become fluid, adaptive, responsive to what's actually needed now instead of what was needed when your identity first formed. And that fluidity, that's where freedom lives. That's where possibility expands. That's where transformation becomes not just possible but inevitable. But let's be honest about what this costs. Because nobody talks about the grief. The very real grief of losing yourself. Even if the self you're losing was making you miserable, it was still you. It was familiar. It had a place in the world. People knew how to relate to it. You knew how to be it. And when it dies, even when you chose to kill it, there's grief, profound grief. You grieve the person you were. You grieve the life you had, even if you didn't want it. You grieve the relationships that were built on that old identity and can't survive without it. You grieve the certainty of knowing who you are. This grief phase is where most people turn back. They start the transformation process, they begin to release the old identity, and then the grief hits. And it's so uncomfortable, so disorienting, that they panic. They think something's wrong. They think they made a mistake, so they try to resurrect the old self. They go back to the familiar patterns, the comfortable behaviors, the known identity. Not because it's better, but because it hurts less than the grief of transformation. And they stay stuck, forever cycling between the desire to change and the terror of actually changing. Here's what you need to know. The grief is not a sign you're on the wrong path. The grief is confirmation you're on the right one. You're supposed to grieve. You're supposed to feel lost. You're supposed to not know who you are for a while. That's not the problem. That's the process. The problem is when you interpret that discomfort as danger and abort the transformation. When you run back to the safety of your old identity before the new one has had time to form. Because transformation isn't instant. There's a gap, a space between who you were and who you're becoming. And in that gap, You're nothing, nobody, just raw potential waiting to take shape. And sitting in that nothing, that nobody, that's the hardest thing most people will ever do. Let me tell you about Marcus. Different person, same mechanism. Marcus was the funny guy. That was his identity. Since childhood, he'd been the one who made people laugh. It was his superpower, his way of being liked, being included, being valued. And it worked. For decades, it worked. Until it didn't. Until he realized that being the funny guy meant people never took him seriously, never saw him as deep or capable or complex, just entertaining, a personality they enjoyed but didn't respect. And somewhere in his 30s, Marcus decided he wanted to be taken seriously. He wanted depth. He wanted meaningful conversations instead of surface-level banter. He wanted to be known, not just liked. So he tried to change. He tried to be more serious, more thoughtful, more present. But every time he was in a group, every time there was a moment of tension or awkwardness, he'd feel this overwhelming urge to crack a joke, to fill the space with humor, to be the funny guy, because that's who he was. That's what people expected. And when he resisted, when he sat with the discomfort instead of deflecting with humor, people would look at him strangely. They'd ask if he was okay. They'd say he seemed off. And Marcus would feel this panic, this sense that without the humor, he didn't know how to be, didn't know who he was. So he'd crack the joke, he'd get the laugh, he'd feel the relief of being back in his familiar role, and he'd hate himself a little more each time. This went on for years. Marcus, knowing he wanted to be different, but unable to release the identity that kept him stuck. Until one day, at a dinner party, someone made a cutting remark disguised as a joke. And instead of laughing it off or responding with another joke like he always did, Marcus just sat with it. He let the comment land. He felt the sting. And he said quietly, "That hurt." Just those two words. That hurt. And the table went silent. No one knew how to respond, because the funny guy doesn't get hurt by jokes. The funny guy laughs everything off. But Marcus wasn't being the funny guy. He was being honest. And in that moment of honesty, something shifted. The old identity loosened its grip, just slightly, but enough. Over the next months, Marcus practiced killing the funny guy, not by forcing himself to be serious, but by allowing himself to be authentic. When he didn't feel like joking, he didn't joke. When someone's comment hurt, he said so. When he had something meaningful to say, he said it, even if it made the conversation heavy. And yes, some people didn't like it. Some people missed the old Marcus. Some friendships faded because they were built entirely on his performance of being entertaining, and that was painful. But new connections formed, deeper ones, with people who were interested in who he actually was, not just what he could provide. And the interesting thing Marcus discovered is that he didn't stop being funny. He just stopped being only funny. Humor became a tool he could use instead of a mask he had to wear. And in moments when he chose authenticity over entertainment, when he let silence exist instead of filling it with a joke, he felt something he'd never felt before: respect. People started listening to him differently, taking him seriously, seeing him as complex and capable, and that felt better than any laugh ever had. But it only became possible when he was willing to kill the identity that had kept him safe, but small, for so long. This is the pattern. Your identity was built to keep you safe, in a particular environment, at a particular time, with particular challenges. And it worked. It got you here. But here is not where you want to stay. And the identity that got you here cannot take you there. It's not equipped. It's not designed for it. It will resist. It will sabotage. It will fight to maintain itself. Because that's what identities do. They defend their own existence. Even when that existence is making you miserable. Even when you consciously want to let it go. The identity will cling, and you have to be willing to pry its fingers loose, one by one, until it finally releases and dies. Let me tell you what the death actually looks like. It's not one dramatic moment. It's 1,000 small funerals. Every time you catch yourself acting from your old identity and choose differently, that's a funeral. Every time someone expects you to be who you used to be and you disappoint them by being who you're becoming, that's a funeral. Every time you feel the pull to return to familiar patterns and you stay in the discomfort of the new instead, that's a funeral. It's death by 1,000 small choices, and each one feels like you're losing yourself, because you are. You're losing the self that doesn't serve you anymore. Here's where it gets really difficult. The people in your life don't want you to change, not because they don't love you, but because your change threatens their stability. They have an investment in you being who they know. They've built their relationship with you based on your current identity. They know how to interact with lawyer Rebecca, with funny Marcus, with whatever version of you they've grown comfortable with. And when you start killing that version, when you start becoming someone else, they lose their reference points. They don't know how to be around you anymore. And that makes them uncomfortable, so they'll try to pull you back. They'll remind you of who you used to be. They'll tell stories from the past that reinforce your old identity. They'll express concern that you're changing. And they'll mean well. They'll genuinely think they're helping, but what they're actually doing is trying to resurrect the version of you that makes sense to them. You have to be willing to lose these people, not by pushing them away, not by cutting them off dramatically, but by understanding that relationships built on your old identity cannot survive your transformation. Some will adapt. Some people will be curious about who you're becoming and will adjust their relationship with you accordingly. Those are your people. But others won't. They'll keep trying to interact with the ghost of who you were. And eventually, you'll realize that the relationship has become a performance. You're pretending to be who they remember, so they feel comfortable. And that's not sustainable. That's not real. So the relationship fades. Not with drama, just with distance. And that's another funeral, another grief, another price of transformation. I want to talk about the void, the space between identities. This is the most dangerous phase of transformation because it's where you have no ground beneath your feet. You've released who you were, but you haven't yet solidified who you're becoming. You're in transition, in flux, in becoming, and it feels like falling. There are no reference points, no certainty, no solid sense of self to grab onto when things get hard. You're just consciousness without a fixed form. And your brain absolutely hates this. Your default mode network is screaming, trying to re-establish a stable identity, any identity, even the old one. Just something solid, something known, something to stop this terrifying freefall. This is where people make the mistake of trying to immediately replace the old identity with a new one. They go from lawyer to woodworker, from funny guy to serious guy, from one label to another. And they think they've transformed, but they haven't. They've just swapped costumes. The mechanism is the same. The rigidity is the same. They're still clinging to a fixed identity, just a different one. And that new identity will eventually become just as limiting as the old one. Because any fixed identity is a prison. Anytime you say, "This is who I am," you're also saying, "This is who I'm not." You're closing doors. You're limiting possibilities. You're defending boundaries that don't need to exist. Real transformation isn't about replacing one identity with another. It's about developing a different relationship with identity altogether. It's about holding your sense of self more loosely. It's about understanding that who you are is contextual, fluid, constantly evolving. You're not one thing. You're not even a consistent thing. You're a process, a becoming, a series of choices and responses and adaptations. And when you can embrace that fluidity, when you can stop defending a particular version of yourself, that's when you become truly free. That's when transformation becomes not a one-time event, but a continuous state of being. But to get there, You have to be willing to sit in the void, to not rush to establish a new identity, to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing exactly who you are, to let yourself be undefined for a while. And this requires a level of courage that most people don't have, because we're taught from childhood that we need to know who we are. We need to have answers when people ask us to describe ourselves. We need labels and categories and consistent personalities. We need to be someone specific. And the idea of being no one in particular, of being whoever is called for in each moment, that sounds terrifying. It sounds like you're not real, like you don't exist. But that's exactly backwards. When you're rigidly defending a particular identity, that's when you're not real. That's when you're performing. That's when you're limiting your full humanity to fit into a box that makes you and others comfortable. When you release that rigidity, when you become fluid and responsive and adaptive, that's when you become most real, most fully yourself. Not yourself as a fixed thing, but yourself as a living process, always changing, always responding, always becoming. Let me tell you about the moment Rebecca realized this. She'd been running her woodworking business for 2 years. It was going well. She was happy, much happier than she'd been as a lawyer. But she noticed something. She'd started to cling to this new identity just as tightly as she'd clung to the old one. She was a woodworker now. That's who she was. And she found herself defending that identity, performing it, trying to prove it. When someone asked if she missed law, she'd get defensive. When someone suggested she might do something else in the future, she'd shut it down. Because she'd worked so hard to kill the lawyer and become the woodworker. She wasn't about to let that go. But then she had a project that required legal knowledge, a contract dispute with a supplier, and her first instinct was to hire a lawyer, because she wasn't a lawyer anymore. She was a woodworker. Lawyers and woodworkers were different categories. But then she realized how absurd that was. She had 15 years of legal training. She could read the contract. She could handle the dispute. Just because she wasn't a lawyer as her primary identity didn't mean she couldn't use those skills when they were useful. And in that moment, she saw the trap. She'd been so focused on not being a lawyer anymore that she'd cut herself off from a part of her experience, a part of her knowledge, a part of who she was. And that's when it clicked. She wasn't a lawyer, she wasn't a woodworker, she was Rebecca, a person who knew law and loved wood and had a particular history and set of skills and interests. And none of that needed to be her identity. It was just what she knew and liked and did. And tomorrow she might learn something new, or develop a different interest, or take on a different project. And that would be fine. She didn't need to defend being anything in particular. She could just be responsive to what life presented and what she was drawn to in each moment. This is the liberation that comes from identity death, not the death of one identity to adopt another, but the death of identification itself. The releasing of the need to be someone consistent and definable and predictable. The embracing of yourself as a process, not a product, as a verb, not a noun, as becoming, not being. And once you taste that freedom, once you experience what it's like to move through the world without constantly defending who you are, you can never go back. The old way of rigid identification feels suffocating. Like wearing a costume you can never take off, and you realize that's what you'd been doing your whole life. Wearing costumes, performing identities, defending boundaries that only existed in your mind. But here's what nobody tells you. This liberation is lonely, at least at first, because most people are still performing their identities, still defending their boundaries, still clinging to consistent self-definitions. And when you stop doing that, when you become fluid and adaptive and undefined, they don't know what to do with you. You don't fit in their categories anymore. You're not predictable. You're not controllable through their expectations. And that makes them uncomfortable. So they'll either avoid you or they'll try harder to put you back in a box, to make you make sense, to get you to commit to being something they can understand and relate to, and you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with making people uncomfortable, with not fitting in, with being misunderstood. Because the alternative is going back to the prison of rigid identity. And now that you know what freedom feels like, that's not an option. So you learn to be comfortable with people's discomfort. You learn to let them have their confusion without trying to fix it. You learn to be undefined in a world that demands definitions, and it's lonely. But it's also profoundly free. Let me talk about what actually triggers the need for identity death. Because it's not random. It doesn't happen just because you decide it should. It happens when the gap between who you are and who you're capable of being becomes unbearable. When the life you have and the life you want are so far apart that you can't pretend anymore. Can't keep making excuses. Can't keep telling yourself that someday you'll change while continuing to be the same person year after year. The trigger is usually pain, deep pain, the kind that makes it clear that staying who you are is no longer an option. For Rebecca, it was that moment in the deposition when she saw herself as already dead. For Marcus, it was the accumulation of moments where he felt invisible behind his humor. For others, it's a health crisis, a relationship ending, a professional failure, a moment of clarity where you see your own life from outside yourself and realize you've been sleepwalking. The specific trigger varies, but the mechanism is the same. The pain of staying who you are finally exceeds the fear of becoming someone else. And in that moment, transformation becomes possible. Not easy, not comfortable, but possible. The question you need to ask yourself is this: are you in enough pain yet? Have you suffered enough in your current identity that you're willing to let it die? Because if you're not, if the discomfort of who you are is still tolerable, you won't change. You'll keep reading books about transformation. You'll keep watching videos about growth. You'll keep thinking about becoming different, but you won't actually do it. Because thinking about change is comfortable. It makes you feel like you're doing something without having to actually do anything. But actual change, identity death, that's not comfortable. That's not thinking. That's dying and being reborn. And you only do that when staying the same becomes more painful than the terror of transformation. So let me ask you directly. Who is the version of you that needs to die? What identity are you clinging to that's keeping you stuck? Is it the person who plays it safe, the person who needs everyone's approval, the person who has to be right, the person who can't show weakness, the person who's always in control, the person who never asks for help, the person who has to be the best, the person who settles for less? Who is that person? Can you see them clearly? Can you feel how tightly you're gripping that identity? How much energy you're spending defending it? How many choices you're not making because they'd require you to be someone different? And here's the harder question. Are you willing to kill that person? Not tomorrow. Not someday when you're ready. Now. Today. Are you willing to start the process of letting them die? Because that's what it takes. Not understanding that they should die, not wanting them to die, actually being willing to kill them, to stop performing that identity, to stop defending those boundaries, to stop making choices from that old programming, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing who you are when you're not being that person anymore. This is where most people stop. Right here, at the moment of actual willingness. They understand everything I've said. They agree with it intellectually. They can see their own limiting identity clearly, but they're not willing to kill it, because killing it means uncertainty, means grief, means losing relationships, means disappointing people, means sitting in the void, means not knowing, and those costs feel too high. So they stay. They stay stuck in an identity that's killing them slowly, because at least it's familiar, at least it's known. At least it's safe, even if that safety is also a prison. But you didn't come this far to stay safe. You didn't listen this long to protect your comfortable prison. You're here because something in you knows that the person you are is not the person you're meant to be. Knows that your current identity is a costume you've worn so long you forgot you could take it off. Knows that transformation isn't about improving who you are, but about releasing who you're not. And that knowing, that deep uncomfortable knowing, that's your invitation, that's your doorway, that's your moment. So here's what you do. You start the funeral, today, right now. You identify one behavior, one pattern, one automatic response that comes from your old identity, just one. And the next time you feel the urge to perform that pattern, you don't. You let the urge be there. You feel the discomfort of not following it. You sit with the anxiety of being different than expected, and you make a different choice, not a huge choice, not a perfect choice. Just a different choice, a choice that someone with your old identity wouldn't make. A choice that feels slightly wrong because it's not consistent with who you've been. That's how you start killing the old self. One inconsistent choice at a time. For Rebecca, the first inconsistent choice was writing that resignation letter without planning it to death. For Marcus, it was saying that hurt instead of laughing it off. For you, it will be something specific to your identity. Maybe it's saying no when you always say yes. Maybe it's asking for help when you always pretend you don't need it. Maybe it's admitting you don't know when you always pretend you do. Maybe it's taking the risk when you always play it safe. Maybe it's staying when you always leave. Whatever it is, you know what it is. That thing you never do because it would mean being someone different. Do that thing. Once. Today. And when you do it, when you make that inconsistent choice, notice what happens. Notice the fear. Notice the discomfort. Notice the voice in your head screaming that you're making a mistake. Notice how your body wants to retreat back to the familiar pattern. Notice all of it, and don't fight it. Don't try to make it go away. Just notice it. Because that discomfort, that fear, that screaming voice, that's not danger. That's your old identity sensing its death. That's your default mode network trying to reassert control. That's the ego fighting for its survival. And you don't have to defeat it. You just have to not obey it. You just have to keep making the inconsistent choice even while the discomfort is present. Do this enough times and something shifts. The old identity starts to loosen. The neural pathways that maintained that sense of self start to weaken. The default mode network stops firing so automatically. And in that space, in that loosening, possibility appears. You start to notice that you can be different people in different contexts, that who you are is more fluid than you thought, that the boundaries you were defending so rigidly were just stories, just habits, just patterns that can change. And once you see that, once you experience that fluidity directly, the old rigid identity becomes impossible to maintain. Not because you're forcing it to die, but because it's revealed itself as the fiction it always was. Let me tell you what's waiting on the other side of identity death. It's not a new, better identity. It's not a final, improved version of yourself. It's freedom from identity altogether. It's the ability to be whoever is needed in each moment without being imprisoned by consistency. It's the capacity to learn and grow and change without having to overcome the resistance of a fixed sense of self. It's the liberation of not having to defend who you are because you're not holding tightly to being anyone in particular. You're just being, responding, adapting, always becoming. Never arrived, never finished, never fixed. And yes, this is unsettling. Yes, this means you can never fully relax into a comfortable self-definition. Yes, this means always being in a state of becoming rather than being. But that's also the point. Being is stagnation. Being is prison. Being is death disguised as stability. Becoming is life. Becoming is growth. Becoming is the only honest relationship with the self that's changing every moment, whether you acknowledge it or not. So you might as well acknowledge it, might as well embrace it, might as well kill the illusion of a fixed self and discover what's possible when you're no longer defending boundaries that don't exist. Here's the truth that no one wants to hear. You've already died many times. The person you were at 7 is dead. The person you were at 15 is dead. The person you were at 25 is dead. Every version of you that ever existed is gone. You're not those people anymore. You're someone who remembers being them, but you're not them. They died, and you emerged from their death. This has been happening your whole life. The only difference is you weren't conscious of it. You didn't choose it. You didn't direct it. It just happened. Through time, through circumstance, through the natural evolution of a human life. What I'm asking you to do is make that process conscious, to actively participate in your own becoming, to choose which aspects of your identity die and which emerge, to be the author of your transformation instead of its passive victim. Because right now, you're still being shaped by your past, by your conditioning, by your wounds, by your default mode network that was programmed when you were young and scared and just trying to survive. And that programming is still running, still determining your choices, still limiting your possibilities, still keeping you consistent with who you were instead of who you could be. But you can change the programming, not by adding to it, not by improving it, but by letting it die, by allowing the old code to dissolve so new code can be written. And that dissolution, that's identity death, that's what we've been talking about this whole time. The willingness to let your old programming dissolve, to sit in the space where nothing is solid and everything is possible. Do not rush to establish new patterns, but to stay fluid and responsive and open, to become comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing who you are, to trust that who you need to be will emerge naturally when you stop forcing yourself to be who you've always been. This is your moment, not because I'm telling you it is, but because you've listened this long, because something in you resonates with what I'm saying, because you recognize yourself in these stories, because you feel the truth of it even though it's uncomfortable, even though it's scary, even though accepting it means you have to change, you have to let go, you have to die. But you already knew that. You've known it for a while. You've just been waiting for permission, waiting for the right time, waiting for it to feel ready. But it never will. Death never feels ready. Transformation never feels safe. The only thing that makes it possible is the willingness to do it anyway. So be willing, right now. In this moment, decide that the person you've been, that identity you've been defending and performing and limiting yourself to, that person ends today. Not perfectly, not completely, but starts ending, starts dying, starts dissolving. And in their place, in that void, in that space of not knowing, something new can emerge, not planned, not constructed, not forced, but allowed to be born from your willingness to let the old die. Allowed to become whatever is most authentic, most alive, most real. That's who's waiting, not a better version of your current identity, but something entirely different. Someone you can't even imagine yet, because they can only exist in the space your current self is occupying. And until you move out of that space, until you die to who you've been, they can't be born. So die, let go, release, and become.